The gunfire stopped, but Amara's heart never slowed down. She'd come to Seoul to disappear, not to fall into the arms of the most dangerous man in the city. One bullet missed her by inches. One look from him changed everything. In the smoke and silence that followed, something ancient and forbidden awakened between them, a pull neither of them asked for and neither of them could survive walking away from. Welcome to Story World Besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. Amara Johnson had been in Seoul for exactly 6 days when she decided the city was trying to kill her, one inconvenience at a time. The subway swallowed her transfer card on day 2. Her landlord raised the rent on day 4, citing a clause she couldn't read because it was written entirely in Korean legal jargon her app refused to translate properly. And on day 6, the gallery that had promised her a 3-month residency informed her, with painful politeness, that the funding had fallen through before she'd even unpacked her paints. She sat on a bench near Chingyecheon Stream that evening, watching the water move under string lights, wondering if leaving Atlanta had been bravery or just a prettier word for running away. She was 28, a textile artist with calloused fingers and a stubborn heart, and she had spent her last real savings on a one-way ticket and a dream that was currently falling apart in real time. She didn't notice the black sedan idling across the street. She didn't notice the man inside it watching her with the kind of attention most people reserved for threats. Kang Min-ho noticed everything. It was the only reason he was still alive at 34, the only reason the Kang name still controlled half of Seoul's shipping routes and most of its silence. He'd built his father's empire into something untouchable, and untouchable men did not stop to watch foreign women feed stale bread to pigeons by a stream. Yet here he was, doing exactly that, for reasons he refused to examine. His driver cleared his throat. "Sir, the meeting with the Hwang family starts in 20 minutes. "I know," Min-ho said and didn't move. The woman on the bench laughed at something only she could see, a private joke with her own loneliness, and the sound carried faintly through the open window. Min-ho's jaw tightened. He had not laughed like that freely, without calculation, in years. The following morning, fate decided to stop being subtle. Amara walked into a small fabric shop in Insadong looking for indigo dye, the kind her grandmother used to import from Lagos. The owner, an elderly woman with kind eyes, pulled bolts of cloth from dusty shelves while Amara ran her fingers over the textures, momentarily forgetting that her bank account was bleeding out and her Visa clock was ticking. She didn't hear the men enter behind her until the shop owner's hands started shaking. "Where is it?" one of the men said in rough English, clearly meant for Amara's benefit, though his eyes were on the owner. "The shipment records. We know Kang's people use this shop." Amara froze near the back wall, dye jars trembling slightly against the wood. She had wandered into something that had nothing to do with her, the way tourists sometimes wander onto private property without realizing the fence was ever there. The second man grabbed the old woman's wrist. Amara's body moved before her mind finished deciding. "Hey," she said sharply, stepping forward, "let her go." Both men turned. One smiled, slow and ugly. "Foreign girl wants to be a hero." That was the exact moment the door opened again, and the temperature in the room changed. Min-ho didn't raise his voice. He never did. "Let go of her hand," he said quietly, "or I will remove yours." The men recognized him instantly, the way alley cats recognize a larger predator. They released the shop owner and backed toward the door, mumbling apologies that meant nothing. Min-ho didn't watch them leave. His eyes had already moved to Amara, to the way she'd planted herself between danger and a stranger without a single thought for her own safety. Something cold and careful in his chest cracked, just slightly, just enough to let something unfamiliar in. "You should not have done that," he said. "Someone had to," Amara answered, still catching her breath, her hands curling into fists at her sides. "She didn't deserve that." He studied her for a long moment, the curve of her jaw, the fire still burning behind her eyes, The way she didn't flinch under his stare the way everyone else did. No, he agreed quietly. She didn't. He left without giving his name. She didn't ask for it. But that night, lying in her cramped studio apartment, Amara found herself thinking about the stillness in his voice, the kind of calm that came from a man who never needed to shout to be obeyed. A few days later, he found her again. Or perhaps she would later think he had never truly stopped watching. A courier arrived at her apartment with a sealed envelope. Inside was a check that covered 3 months of gallery space, no name attached, no explanation, only a note in clean, deliberate handwriting. Finish what you came here to do. Amara stared at it for a long time before tearing it in half. She was proud, and pride did not accept charity from strangers in tailored suits who appeared out of nowhere with quiet threats and quieter rescues. She marched to the address stamped faintly on the envelope's corner, a glass tower that scraped the sky above the Han River, and demanded to see whoever had sent it. She did not expect it to be him. Min-ho's office was cold in the way expensive things often were, all steel and glass and silence. He looked up from his desk when she stormed in past 2 protesting assistants, and something in his expression shifted, surprise giving way almost instantly to something warmer, something he buried just as quickly. "You tore it," he said, glancing at the torn check now flattened on his desk by her palm. "I don't take money from strangers. We've met twice." "Strangers," she repeated. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth, gone before it fully arrived. "Kang Min-ho," he said simply, extending a hand. "Now we're not strangers." She didn't take his hand. "Amara Johnson, and I still don't want your money." "It isn't charity, it's investment. I've seen your sketches." At her sharp look, he added, "The gallery owner showed me before the funding collapsed. Your work is good. It deserves walls, not a closed door." "And what do you get out of it?" His eyes held hers, steady, unreadable. "Nothing," he said, and the words sounded almost like a confession, as though he too found that fact strange. She left without accepting the money that day. But she also left without quite managing to hate him, which frustrated her more than anything else about the entire encounter. By the end of the week, Amara had taken a job waitressing at a small Nigerian restaurant near Itaewon to cover rent. Her pride intact but her bank account thinner than ever, she told herself this was fine. This was character building. This was the artist's struggle every biography romanticized after the fact. She did not expect Min-ho to walk into that restaurant on a Tuesday evening, alone, dressed down in a dark sweater that made him look dangerously human instead of untouchable. He sat in her section, of course he did. "This is harassment," she said, setting down a menu with more force than necessary. "This is dinner," he corrected. "I like jollof rice." "You don't even know what jollof rice is." "I'm learning." He looked up at her, and there was something disarming about the small, genuine curiosity in his expression, nothing like the cold composure she'd seen in his office. "Teach me." Against every instinct screaming at her to stay professional, stay distant, stay safe, Amara found herself sliding into the booth across from him during her break, explaining the difference between Nigerian and Ghanaian jollof with the kind of passion she usually reserved for her art. He listened the way few people ever had, completely, without checking his phone, without performing interest. He simply listened. "My grandmother used to say food carries memory," she said, softening despite herself. "You taste home in it wherever you are." "And what does home taste like for you?" She paused, the question catching her off guard with its gentleness. "I don't know anymore," she admitted. "I've been trying to find that out since I got here." Something flickered across his face, recognition, maybe, or longing he didn't have words for. "I understand that better than you'd think," he said quietly. "Sometimes the empire you build doesn't feel like home either." It was the first true thing he'd said to her, and it landed somewhere deep and unguarded in her chest. Word spread fast in Min-ho's world. the way it always did when a man who controlled half the city's silence suddenly started showing interest in something soft. His second-in-command, Junwoo, found him on the penthouse balcony 3 nights later, staring out at the river instead of reviewing the Hwang contracts that needed his signature. "You've seen her 4 times this week," Junwoo said carefully. "5," Min-ho corrected without turning. "She's not from our world." "I know." The Hwangs are already asking questions about why shipments through her neighborhood are suddenly untouchable. People are starting to talk. Min-ho's jaw tightened, the only outward sign of the storm settling behind his calm. "Then make sure they stop talking," he said, quietly. Junwoo studied his boss for a long moment, the man who had not shown this much unguarded attention to anyone since his mother died. "You're falling for her." Min-ho didn't deny it. He simply said, "Find out everything about the men who came into that fabric shop. I want to know who sent them, and I want to know before they think of going near her again." Because that was the truth underneath all his careful stillness. Somewhere between the torn check and the jollof rice, between her fire and her fierce, unguarded kindness, something in Kang Min-ho had woken up that he thought had died with his father's funeral, the part of him capable of wanting something he couldn't simply acquire or command. He wanted her, not as a transaction, not as a possession. He wanted to be the kind of man who deserved to stand beside her without dragging her into the dark. The trouble was, his world rarely let anyone leave that darkness untouched, and somewhere in the shadows of Seoul, the men who had grabbed that shop owner's wrist were already reporting back to someone far more dangerous than themselves, someone who had just learned the name Amara Johnson, and exactly how much it might be worth to Kang Min-ho. The following evening, Amara received a single white rose at the restaurant with no card attached, only a small note in the same deliberate handwriting from before. "I don't know how to do this carefully. I only know I don't want to stop." She held it long after her shift ended, standing alone in the cool night air outside the restaurant, feeling something dangerous and warm unfurl in her chest, something that felt suspiciously like falling. She told herself she wouldn't. She told herself a man like Kang Min-ho came with consequences she couldn't afford, debts measured in more than money. But standing there under the streetlights of a city that had tried so hard to push her out, holding a flower from a man who looked at her like she was the only steady thing in his entire dangerous world, Amara understood with a kind of quiet dread that it was already too late to simply walk away. By the following week she had agreed to see him properly. Not charity, not rescue, just dinner on her terms in a small restaurant she chose herself, away from glass towers and tailored suits. She didn't yet know that across the city, a woman named Hwang Seo-yeon, daughter of the family Min-ho had spent years carefully maneuvering around, had just placed a photograph of Amara on her father's desk, along with a single, cold question. Should we remove the obstacle before it becomes a problem? The storm Min-ho had sensed coming for weeks was no longer circling. It had found its target. And nothing in Seoul moved quietly once the Hwang family decided someone needed to disappear. That's the end of Batch 1. Want me to continue straight into Batch 2, picking up with the danger closing in on Amara and the relationship deepening toward the catalyst event? The morning after their first real dinner together, Amara woke to find a man in a dark coat standing across the street from her apartment building, not moving, not pretending to do anything else. She recognized the stillness immediately. It belonged to Min-ho's world, even though the face wasn't his. She called him before she even finished her coffee. "There's someone watching my building." "I know," Min-ho said, his voice low and even though something underneath it had gone sharp. "He's mine. He's been there since last night. You put a guard outside my apartment without asking me." "I put a guard outside your apartment because the Hwang family knows your name now." A pause, heavier than silence should ever be. "I should have told you sooner. I'm telling you now. Pack a bag. I'm coming to get you." She wanted to argue. She wanted to remind him that she hadn't asked to be folded into his war, that she'd come to Seoul to build something of her own, not to become a liability standing too close to a man with enemies on every floor of the city. But something in his voice, the barely contained urgency beneath all that practiced calm, told her this wasn't a conversation. This was a warning. By the time he arrived, she was already standing at the door with one bag packed, her hands trembling slightly as she locked it behind her. "Talk to me," she said, the moment she was in the car. "Who are the H-Wangs? Why does my name matter to them?" Min-ho's hands tightened on the wheel. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked less like the controlled, untouchable man from the glass tower, and more like someone carrying a weight he didn't know how to set down. "The H-Wang family has wanted my shipping routes for 3 years," he said. "My father refused to sell. They killed him for it, made it look like an accident, and I have spent every day since making sure they never get close enough to try that again with me. And now they think I'm close to you." "You are close to me," he said quietly, "closer than anyone has been allowed in a long time." The admission hung between them, fragile and unguarded, nothing like the calculated stillness he wore like armor everywhere else. Amara studied his profile, the tension along his jaw, the way his eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror even as he spoke to her with such open honesty. "I didn't ask for this," she said softly. "Any of it, I just wanted to paint." "I know." His voice cracked slightly, just enough for her to hear it. "And I would give anything to give that back to you, the simple version of this city, the one without me in it making everything dangerous. But I can't make myself stay away from you, Amara. I've tried. I'm not strong enough for that." It should have terrified her, the honesty of a man who controlled half a city's silence admitting he couldn't control his own heart. Instead, something in her chest ached with a tenderness she hadn't expected to feel for him. Not yet, not this fast. He moved her into a secured apartment in his building that same afternoon, 2 floors below his own penthouse, with guards stationed quietly enough that they didn't intrude but firmly enough that nothing could reach her without his knowledge first. She hated how easily she adjusted to the safety of it, how quickly the fear in her chest settled simply because he was close. That evening he knocked on her door holding 2 containers of takeout and an apology written all over his face. "I don't know how to do soft," he admitted, setting the food on her counter. "I know how to protect. I know how to remove threats. I don't know how to sit with someone and just be calm." "Then sit," Amara said, patting the spot on the couch beside her. "I'll teach you." They ate in comfortable silence at first, her favorite playlist humming low in the background, his shoulders slowly losing the rigid line they always held in public. When he finally spoke again, his voice had softened into something she hadn't heard from him before, unguarded, almost boyish. "My mother used to hum while she cooked," he said. "I haven't thought about that in years." "What happened to her?" "She left when I was 12. Couldn't handle what my father's world demanded of her. I don't blame her anymore. I understand it better now than I did then." He looked at Amara, something fragile and searching in his gaze. "I'm terrified of becoming someone you have to leave, too." "I'm not her," Amara said quietly, reaching over to take his hand. "And you're not your father. You don't have to become anything you don't choose to be." He turned his hand to hold hers properly, his thumb brushing slowly across her knuckles, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all, because nothing needed to be said. The air between them had shifted into something neither of them could pretend not to feel anymore. A few nights later, the catalyst event none of them saw coming finally arrived. Hwang Seoyeon, tired of waiting for her father's careful, calculated strategy to bear fruit, decided to take matters into her own hands. She arranged for 2 of her men to corner Amara outside the restaurant where she still insisted on keeping her waitressing shifts, refusing to let Min-ho's money erase the independence she'd fought so hard to build. The attack happened fast, the way real danger always does. No warning, no drawn-out confrontation, just hands grabbing her arm and a van idling at the curb with its side door already open. Amara screamed and fought, years of stubborn pride turning into pure instinct, and it was that scream, carried on the wind toward the security detail Min-ho had quietly stationed 2 blocks away, that saved her life. Min-ho arrived 11 minutes later to find one of his men restraining the attackers and Amara sitting on the curb, shaking, a bruise already forming along her wrist where they'd grabbed her. He dropped to his knees in front of her without a single thought for his tailored suit touching the wet pavement. "Amara, look at me. Are you hurt? Tell me where it hurts." "I'm okay," she whispered, though her voice shook with the lie. "I'm okay, Min-ho." He pulled her into his arms so tightly she could feel his heart hammering against her cheek, faster than she had ever felt it, faster than the calm, controlled man she knew should have allowed. "I almost lost you," he said roughly into her hair. "I told myself I could keep you safe and protected from a distance, and I was wrong. I was so wrong." That night, after the attackers had been dealt with in ways Amara didn't ask about and didn't want explained, Min-ho refused to leave her side. He sat beside her bed in the secured apartment, holding her hand, watching her like she might disappear if he blinked. "Stay," she said quietly, when he finally rose to give her space to sleep. "Please, I don't want to be alone tonight." He hesitated only a moment before climbing carefully onto the bed beside her, fully clothed, simply holding her against his chest while her breathing slowly steadied. The vulnerability of the night, the fear still trembling in her bones, the desperate relief flooding through both of them, pulled away every careful wall either of them had built. "I have never been afraid of anything the way I was afraid tonight," he admitted into the darkness. "Not enemies, not death, just the thought of a world where you weren't in it anymore." Amara turned in his arms to face him, her fingers finding the line of his jaw in the dim light. "Then don't let go," she whispered. What passed between them after that was not loud or rushed. It was slow, fragile, built from months of careful longing finally allowed to breathe. Every touch heavy with everything neither of them had dared to say out loud, until fear had stripped away the pretense of control. The room fell quiet except for the soft sound of two people choosing each other completely, finding in each other the one safe place neither of them had believed still existed in their separate, complicated worlds. In the morning, Amara woke to an empty bed and a folded note on the pillow beside her. Her stomach dropped before she even read it. "Had to handle something, back soon, stay inside." It wasn't the words that frightened her. It was the absence, the silence after a night that had cracked her wide open, leaving her terrified that what they'd shared had been too much, too fast, that morning light would bring regret instead of tenderness. She had seen this pattern before in other lives, other men, intimacy followed by retreat, vulnerability mistaken for weakness. By noon, with no word from him, panic curdled into a decision. She packed her bag again, this time to leave entirely, convincing herself it was better to go before the rejection became unbearable, before she had to watch him look at her with distance in his eyes. She made it as far as the lobby before Junwoo intercepted her, breathless, having clearly run from somewhere. "Where are you going?" "Home, wherever that means now." "He's been gone since 5 this morning hunting down the men who hired Seoyeon's people," Junwoo said urgently. "He didn't leave because of what happened between you. He left because the Hwang sent another team toward the restaurant an hour after you fell asleep, and he's been dismantling their entire operation ever since so nothing like last night ever happens again." Relief and shame crashed into Amara at once. "He should have told me." "He's not good at telling people things," Junwoo admitted. "He's only ever good at protecting them." Min-ho returned 3 hours later, exhausted, a fresh cut along his temple, finding Amara waiting in the lobby with her bag still beside her. His face fell the instant he saw it. "You are leaving." "I thought," she started, then stopped, swallowing hard. "I thought last night meant something different to you than it did to me. I thought you regretted it." He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, cupping her face in both hands with a desperation that erased every trace of his usual composure. "Regret you." His voice cracked. "Amara, I have spent the entire morning making sure no one in this city ever has the chance to take you from me again. Last night didn't scare me away. It terrified me into realizing exactly how much I have to lose." "Then don't disappear like that again," she said, tears slipping free despite her best efforts. "Don't make me think I'm something you walk away from in the morning." "Never," he promised, his forehead pressing against hers. "I will spend every day proving that to you, for as long as you'll let me." But peace in Min-ho's world never lasted long, and within the week, the real danger arrived in a form neither of them had anticipated. Hwang Seoyeon, furious at her failed attempt and desperate to salvage her family's crumbling leverage, made one final, reckless move. She had Amara taken directly from the gallery space Min-ho had quietly funded, snatched during broad daylight while security focused on a stage disturbance 2 streets away, a distraction calculated with cold precision. Min-ho received the photograph 40 minutes later, Amara bound to a chair in an abandoned warehouse near the docks, her chin lifted despite the fear in her eyes, refusing to let the camera see her break. Something inside Kang Min-ho went terrifyingly still. "Get me everyone," he said to Jun-woo, his voice quieter than it had ever been, which was somehow more frightening than if he had screamed. "I don't care what it costs. I don't care what we burn to the ground to get her back. Tonight, the Hwang family answers for every single thing they have ever done." What followed was less a rescue and more a reckoning. 3 years of careful restraint unraveling in a single night, as Min-ho moved through Seoul's underworld like a man with nothing left to lose, calling in debts, breaking alliances, dismantling the Hwang family's protection piece by piece, until the warehouse where they held her became the only safe place left for them to hide. And even that illusion shattered the moment he walked through the door. Seoyeon stood beside Amara's chair, a gun loosely in her hand, her composure cracking at the sight of him. "You're supposed to be reasonable, Min-ho. You're supposed to negotiate." "I stopped being reasonable the moment you touched her," Min-ho said, his voice low and lethal, every step toward her measured and unstoppable. "Let her go, and I will let you leave this country with your life. That offer expires in 10 seconds. You'd burn down everything your father built for a foreign artist you've known for 2 months." "I would burn down the entire world for her," Min-ho said simply, and something in the absolute certainty of his voice made even Seoyeon's men lower their weapons. The standoff ended not in violence but in collapse, Seoyeon's own people abandoning her the moment they understood exactly how thoroughly Min-ho had already dismantled everything that gave her power. She was led away in handcuffs by authorities Min-ho had quietly tipped off hours earlier, her family's empire crumbling behind her as Min-ho finally reached Amara, his hands shaking as he untied the ropes binding her wrists. "I'm here," he whispered, pulling her into his chest the moment she was free. "I'm here, you're safe, I have you." "I knew you'd come," Amara said against his shoulder, her voice breaking with relief and exhaustion. "I never doubted that for a second." "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to doubt it again," he promised. By the end of that month, the Hwang family's grip on Seoul had collapsed entirely, and Kang Min-ho had quietly begun stepping back from the parts of his empire he no longer wished to carry, slowly transforming his father's legacy into something he could one day be proud to leave behind. Amara's gallery opening finally happened, her textiles and paintings filling the walls of a space that was entirely, truthfully hers, no strings attached, no debts owed. Min-ho stood at the back of the room that evening, watching her laugh freely with strangers who admired her work, the same unguarded laughter that had first cracked something open in him months ago beside a stream he'd had no real reason to be watching. When the gallery emptied, he found her standing alone in front of her favorite piece, a sprawling textile work in deep indigo and gold that she had named simply Home. I used to think home was a place, she said quietly, sensing him beside her without turning. Somewhere I left behind in Atlanta, somewhere I was always trying to find again. And now, she finally turned to face him, her eyes soft and certain. Now I think it's a person, and I think I found him in a city that tried very hard to keep me from getting here. Min-ho reached into his jacket, his hands betraying the first real nervousness she had ever seen in him, and withdrew a small velvet box. I have built an empire most men would kill for, he said, his voice low and unsteady. I have more money and more power than I will ever need. None of it ever felt like enough until you. Amara Johnson, will you let me spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to doubt that you belong anywhere with anyone? Especially me. Yes, she breathed before he had even finished opening the box, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They married 6 months later in a small ceremony that blended both their worlds completely. Her grandmother's indigo cloth draped over the altar beside traditional Korean wedding garments. Jollof rice served alongside dishes Min-ho had finally learned to cook properly, badly, but with love, exactly the way she'd once joked he would. A year after that, Amara stood in their penthouse nursery, one hand resting on the gentle curve of her stomach, watching the sun set gold and warm over the Han River. Min-ho wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin against her shoulder, the same quiet stillness in his voice that had once intimidated entire boardrooms, now reserved only for moments exactly like this one. "Do you ever think about that bench by the stream?" he murmured. "The pigeons, the bread, how close I came to never speaking to you at all." "I think about it every day," Amara said softly, leaning back into him. "It's where home found me." Outside, Seoul glittered on, indifferent and endless, holding its secrets and its dangers the way it always had. But inside that quiet room, two people who had once belonged to entirely separate worlds held on to each other, and the small, growing life between them, proof that even in a city built on power and silence, something soft and unbreakable had finally been allowed to bloom. The story moved you, let me know in the comments. Do you believe love can survive danger, distance, and everything the world throws at it? Tell me honestly, what would you have done in Amara's place? If you're new here, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next emotional Afro-Korean love story. Until next time, thank you for watching. And remember, the right person won't just see your fire. They'll burn down their whole world to protect it.